Hey, glad you're back. Welcome to Chapter 5. The title of Chapter 5 is The Importance of Moral Leaders. And just keep remembering, I'm no Eric Metaxas, and I'm okay with that. Once again, if you disagree with me, go back to his book, read his book. The importance of moral leaders. Jesus said this in Scripture, "For everyone to whom much is given, from him much will be required." And aren't we like that in America? Much has been given to us. And so Metaxas goes on this search for moral leadership, asking, where is the moral leadership? He starts with this quote: "If a self-governing people must possess virtue, and if they encourage virtue by remembering heroic stories and venerating heroes, what about the character of that people's leaders? How might their character or lack of it come into play in regard to our ability to keep the fragile republic of ordered freedoms entrusted to us?" Now read that on page 149 and reread it. There is a great lesson there. Basically, he's going, what about the morality of our leadership? What about character? And how do I balance character and competence? Because there's been some great men of character in our leadership while they were not as competent. While we've had great competence in leadership, we haven't had great character. So if you'll trace back, and he starts back through the presidents, he does it in not in a chronological order, but start chronologically and ask yourself, what happened in the reign or Kennedy's administration? What happened in Nixon? President Carter came along not too long after Nixon. He was, once again, here's where character might not have meant competence. And then we have Clinton, and we all lived through the Clinton days. And so Metaxas is reminding us that character counts. I'm going to look on page 155 here to a quote right about middle of the page. More states, and when he says states, he's talking about countries, more states have perished because of a violation of their mores than because of a violation of their laws. How important is character? You tell me. Interesting, on page 156, he starts telling us about Cincinnatus. And we all know that Cincinnatus lived before the days of the Cincinnati Reds and that awful chili they eat up there. Sorry if you're in Cincinnati, I apologize. You know I was kidding. Cincinnatus was called in ancient Rome to be a senator. And when they came and got him, he was plowing and he had a happy life. And they called him in and they said, "We have elected you to the Senate." And the story goes that he left his horse, got dressed, and went to Rome to be a senator. And when he got there, he helped them win a great victory, a military victory. And miraculously, Cincinnatus resigned from his post 15 days after he was elected. He had gotten his job done. So he went back. He goes, "I'm going back to plowing. I'm going back to working in my yard." He also gives us a great review of Washington. And in his final speech and finest hour, maybe not his final speech, but his finest hour, Washington was called in by some of the great military men of the Revolutionary War. It was in 1783, and they called him in and they said, "Hey, we hadn't been getting paid, and we want you to lead us, and we're going to go to Washington and we're going to get our money back. And if we don't get our money back, we're going to lead a coup." and take over the country. And his speech on page 162 and 163 is fabulous because he basically stepped in and rebuked them and said that's not the character of leadership in our country. A stunning speech. It's stunning because in our day and age, the money is everything. How much are you going to pay me? Come lead our country. What do I get paid? Do I get a lifetime pension? I want you to lead our church. What does it pay? Can you imagine that Washington said it doesn't matter if you ever get paid or not. Do what's right. Now Metaxas turns, and I can't do it justice, but he turns to the life of William Wilberforce, who grew up in England. And interesting, he grew up in England when it was fashionable to be immoral. And just a couple of the facts. It was not unusual to see politicians trading money for votes. It was not unusual for debauchery to be open. I'm not even sure I know totally what debauchery is. I just know it's really bad. And it involves sex and drinking. In that day and age, 25% of single women in England were prostitutes. And so it's on this stage that William Wilberforce steps out and begins to fight slavery and begins to fight for human rights. And Metaxas goes on to say that Wilberforce actually made goodness fashionable, where at one point immorality was fashionable. I want to read you from 173 where it says, Wilberforce understood the idea that the law itself was a teacher and will lead people toward what it prescribes and away from what it prohibits. But he knew that a debased culture cannot be stemmed through legislation alone. In fact, in a debased culture, legislation may even drive people away from the law, tell them what they can't do, and watch what they wind up doing. On page 176, I pick up, and he's closing his segment on Wilberforce, and he says, in the middle of the page here on 176, what is more important still is that if at any point in a republic of self-government the people begin to distrust their leaders as somehow corrupt or as more concerned with themselves than with those they serve, the whole skein of self-government begins to unravel and is fatally threatened. That'll scare us to death. In a world where we're not sure if our politicians care about us. Do they love us or do they love themselves? Are they concerned with we the people? I'm always hearing they're telling me what the American people believe. Well, I got to tell you, I am one of the American people, and I don't hold all these opinions that are told to me on television. We've got to find politicians who love the other person, who are willing to sit down at the table and, of all things, talk to each other. We ought to rebel, and we are rebelling a bit against two parties who fight against each other just because the other one is in power. He closes with this statement, and he was talking about why Washington and Wilberforce were such role models for politicians. He said, both of them set the bar so high that it encouraged others to do so, and thereby encouraged trust in those who had elected them. We need to find men and women that we trust, that we elect, and send them to do our work, and to do it because it's right. Thanks.